the Shropshire Seniors Hustings meeting, which is going to be chaired by Eric Smith. And thank you to all the candidates for coming along. I knew you wouldn't miss it, because senior citizens are the ones that vote the most. So I will now hand you over to Eric to chair the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Good morning, everybody. If we haven't met, my name's Eric Smith. I present breakfast on BBC Radio Shropshire 6 mornings a week, which is basically news and current affairs, local, national, international, and of course, the election plays a very big part. Suzanne Evans for UKIP. Suzanne, you have 3 minutes starting from now.
Thank you. I'm going to walk a little bit further because my voice is giving up a little bit. So the closer I, no, that's okay, but the closer I get to you, the more you'll be able to hear me. Great to be with you today. Let me tell you a little bit about some of the things. We launched our manifesto yesterday. So what did we have in mind, particularly for older people? Firstly, according to Age UK, there are nearly 1 million people between the age of 65 and 89 who don't get the social care they need. The Coalition's cuts over the past 5 years have been brutal. They've cut about £1.2 billion from the overall budget, and we will pledge to put that back into older people's care by 2020. Pensions. Daniel's quite right. The Conservatives did a great job on putting in that triple lock, but unfortunately they also cut the state pension age quite dramatically, or pushed it up quite dramatically. And when you've had a lifetime of planning perhaps for your retirement, then those hopes and dreams can be wiped out if you suddenly find you have to stay in work even longer. So we're going to introduce a flexible state pension window, so you can take your pension slightly earlier from the age of 65, and we think this will particularly benefit women. In the same way as the moment that you can take a slightly bigger pension if you retire a little bit later, we'll give you the opportunity to retire earlier and take a slightly lower state pension. Tax. This is something that people perhaps forget about sometimes in the context of older people, but it's still important. We'll raise the personal allowance to at least £13,000 a year. Not only will that take anyone on minimum wage out of tax together, which is something we're particularly proud of, for older people that have got savings and investments, that means you potentially get an awful lot more tax-free as well. We've really thought about older people in our manifesto. One of the other things that I know I've spoken to older people about very often is the fact that they don't have contact with their grandparents when their parents split up. So we will make sure that we give grandparents, we'll change the law to give grandparents visiting rights for their children. And I hope none of you are in that tragic situation, but I hope you agree that that is potentially something that's very, very important. So I think that's the main thing about what we're doing for older people. I'm quite envious, though, too, of most of you in this room, because unlike me, you probably had a chance in 1975 to vote on whether or not we joined the European Union. And of course, as I'm sure you're all aware, a vote, an EU referendum, is something that UKIP is passionate about and wants, because anyone over 57 hasn't had the chance anymore. Now, my mum was sensible. She didn't vote to go into it. But she did think about it very carefully and nearly voted yes, because she thought she was going into a common market. But of course, it's not a common market, it's political union. And the message I hope that I can get across today and generally is that we don't have to be in political union for the EU to trade with it, and it's time that the people of Britain had another vote. Thank you.
You've all been remarkably consistent in time, which is really good, thank you. Your generosity, though, Suzanne, as a party, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, what we released with our manifesto yesterday was this 20-page document, and it's something that none of the other parties have done. It's actually, our accounts have been independently audited by an organisation called the Centre for Economics and Business Research. They're an independent, in fact, I think there's a Liddell on the board actually as well, so very independent, the only party that has a fully costed manifesto.
Where's the money come from?
The money is coming from scrapping HS2, which will save us £4 billion over the course of the next Parliament in capital costs. It's coming from repealing the Barnett formula, which is the way at the moment in which money is given to the devolved nations. 2 parliamentary committees have said it's unfair. The other parties in Westminster are too frightened of the Scots, who are doing very well in making their own money and raising their own taxes. So we will replace that for a needs-based assessment, like the parliamentary committees have actually recommended. We also want to cut the foreign aid budget, not completely. We will still be giving more than Spain and Italy combined, which we think is generous. And of course, in 2 years' time, in theory, when we left the European Union, we'd have £9 billion extra to spend.
Would you concede, finally, and then we get to the audience and their questions, would you concede, though, that It's hardly likely that you are going to be in a position to take us out of Europe.
Probably not
No.
in the next...
So your plans are for nothing?
Well, actually, no, because it's quite interesting. I think we need to have UKIP MPs in the Houses of Parliament after the election, because if we don't, Cameron won't fulfil his promise. He's saying we will give you an EU referendum if I am Prime Minister of a Conservative majority government. Now, I'm sure even Daniel, as optimistic as he'd want to be, would agree that's not going to happen, and you have to listen to David Cameron's words carefully.
All right.
He's promised us a referendum in 2007 and in 2009.
And 2017.
No, he promised us one in 2007.
That's not true. We'll get to that.
So, you know, we need to be there, hold the feet to the fire, so we get that moving.
All right, let us move on.
Senior citizens have no representation at local or national level. Will your party consider the appointment of a Minister for Senior Citizens, the minimum age requirement being 60 years? At that age, the Minister can then properly debate and even understand the problems of senior citizens.
So the Minister needs to be 60?
Yes.
Suzanne Evans for the UKIP then, a Minister for Senior Citizens, Suzanne.
Thanks for your question, Anne. I'm going to disagree with what you said at the outset when you said that you didn't think older people were represented either at a local or a national level. I simply don't think that's true. I've been a councillor for 4 years and we had a huge amount of older people on the council. In fact, I think one of my colleagues was 83 and she had been doing the job for quite some considerable time. So that's the first thing. That said, however, I very much pushed for us to have an older people's champion, and I'm glad to say I got cross-party support for that idea, because I did feel, particularly as Laura said, we are growing older as a nation, and so it is important to, I think, have that representation. As far as the question of ministers is concerned, at the outset of the Second World War, in the 1940s, we had 8 cabinet ministers. We now have 22 secretaries of state, and 87 associated junior ministers and parliamentary undersecretaries of state. UKIP thinks that's far too many, that they're actually not needed, and we want to shrink the cost of government, and that would release money to go back into community projects, including, of course, older people's care. So rather than add to the minister's total, we want to shrink it, but we would put that money, potentially, into other issues that I think would benefit older people.
So you wouldn't actually advocate a minister?
You wouldn't advocate a minister for senior
I
citizens?
don't think so, but not because of age grounds. It seems to me the fact you wouldn't have somebody over 60, this discrimination, it sounds like a bit of a cop-out, frankly. I think if we were going to have an older people's minister, I would agree that they should be an older person. But it's the principle of expanding government and making it ever more bigger. We want to shrink it.
Who thinks in this room that we should have, in the next government, whoever it may be, a Minister for Senior Citizens? Stick your hand in the air. And the ice cream man as well, right, okay. And who thinks we should not necessarily have a Minister for Senior Citizens? About you, I think maybe a few more no's on our... Anybody got any relevant points to raise from this then? Let's go.
Talking about a reduction in ministers, how about a reduction in MPs and House of Lords members?
Who would vote for a reduction of MPs? Numbers, that is.
I gather the salary for an MP now has just gone up to £73,000 a year, or just over, from April the 1st. I want to ask each candidate, if elected, whether they would regard the role of an MP as a full-time job, or, in addition, whether they see it reasonable and acceptable for MPs from all parties, currently, to take on consultancy work or paid outside employment. And I think that's one of the issues, one of the many issues, which actually results in disillusionment about our political processes at the moment. Suzanne, job or no job? Full-time job for MPs, consultancy's okay, what?
Full-time job.
Right.
I said already, I've worked as a councillor. That paid me, I think, £8,500 a year. But I took it as seriously as I would take a job worth £73,000 a year. That was a full-time job almost, and I really worked very, very hard to try and keep my business going because I couldn't survive on the £8,000 a year. But no, it's absolutely a full-time job, without a shadow of a doubt. And I'd just like to say, Daniel, yes, I am Deputy Chairman of UKIP, and yes, I have been travelling around a little bit of late, but I'm sure if I'd wanted to, I could have been given an easier seat to fight, one where UKIP has more chance of winning. And I know I've got a fight on my hands against Daniel, but I'm standing here because I don't believe in people being parachuted into constituencies. I'm standing here because this is my home and I believe in this constituency and I would very much like to represent you.
Thank you very much.
Just really to Suzanne Evans, who happens to be a neighbour of mine, although I didn't know it, and I've lived there for 40 years. But I was just going to ask her, she said she got £8,500 when she was a councillor. Now, she was a Conservative councillor then, and you were running your own business then at the same time. Was the fact that you weren't accepted by the Conservatives to be an MP, to be a candidate, one of the reasons that you sort of had to have a change of heart?
It's a little loaded, Judith, but there we are. Okay, we know where you're coming from. That's fine. Carry on. One brief response, then we move on.
It's quite a funny story, actually. I was encouraged by my Conservative colleagues to try and become an MP under the Conservatives. I have to say I had my severe doubts about it because I was already becoming very disenchanted with the Conservatives. You might be interested to know that the reason they turned me down is because they didn't think my public speaking skills were up to scratch.
Why do we have to pay tax on the state pension when you get a small industrial pension or a pension from your previous employers? That those two added together take you over the 10,500. Whereas if the state pension was tax-free, you'd be well under the tax, 10,500, and you'd be so many pounds a month better off.
Right, why do we have to pay tax on our state pensions? Let's start with you, Suzanne, and we'll go across the table here.
Well, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Quite ridiculous. And that's, as I said, that's why we're raising the personal allowance to £13,000 a year, because we don't believe that anyone in your position should pay tax. It's that simple.
Would it help the debt if we scrapped HS2?
Yes, and it's that saving is in our manifesto and in our budget, £4 billion by 2020 saved.
Care in the community was supposed to help prevent hospitalisation of elderly and consequently blood blocking. With further cuts being made, how do the parties propose to provide adequate levels of care for vulnerable and older people to achieve this aim?
Suzanne Evans.
Thank you. Thank you for your question, Ben. 1 million hospital days are lost every year as a result of bed blocking.
Nobody can say it, don't worry.
Nobody can say it, hard word, alliteration. How do we stop that? Well, there's a very simple way, actually. The problem at the moment is you've got the social care side of issues. The home care is handled by the local authority, whereas, of course, the hospital care is handled by the NHS. What we would do is merge the two together and put it under a single, bring it all under the NHS and put it in a single budget. Yeah. So therefore, you're not having that tautology between two people fighting about who gets what budget, and that's the problem. So you integrate health and social care. It's the common sense solution that I think UKIP is the ones that like to come up with the common sense solutions. Also, we want to make sure that there is more home care in place. And the 1.2 billion per year that I said we put into social care will very much go towards supporting more home care. There's also something else we feel very strongly about, and that's the home care workers. They shouldn't be forced into these 15-minute slots. We'll scrap those 15-minute slots. They're a complete
Shropshire Council told me a few weeks ago that there were very few 15-minute slots.
Well, that's okay. We're going to take it off Shropshire Council and give it to the NHS anyway, so it doesn't matter. And we also want to support home care workers. They're treated appallingly badly. If you treat home care workers badly, how can you expect them to look after some of the most vulnerable in our own community? So not only will we scrap the 15-minute slots, we'll make the providers pay them for their travel time between visits, and we'll make sure they pay them at least the minimum wage.
This is a question about Europe and international affairs. Now, senior citizens will no doubt remember when they were the younger generation voting in the 1975 European referendum. Led by Ted Heath, if you remember. Can the panel comment on how they see the future of the United Kingdom should there be a vote to leave the European community after 2017? United Kingdom, don't just think England, think Scotland, think Wales, think Northern Ireland when you answer this, because the future of the United Kingdom is now under question as well. And also, could leaving NATO be a consideration?
From Suzanne Evans from UKIP.
Well, Laura started out this hustings by saying that she wasn't going to toe the party line, that she was going to be independent, and I'm afraid, Laura, you've shown exactly the party line. You clearly don't understand the issues, and I'm sorry. Well, you know, let me be blunt. Switzerland, a thriving economy, Not as thriving as ours, it's only a quarter the size of ours, but you know what? Switzerland exports 4 times as much to the European Union than we do. So you tell me how your arguments match up with that. We export 40 billion more to the USA than we export to the European Union. We're not in a trade bloc with the USA. We're not in political union with the USA. We haven't had to become the 51st state of America in order to trade with the USA. This idea, I just want to knock it on the head this morning forever. You do not have to be in the EU to trade with the EU. We are a strong, independent country. We can more than stand on our own 2 feet. If Liechtenstein, tiny little country of just 30,000 people, can trade with the European Union on its own, why on earth can't we? And just to finally answer the question about NATO, absolutely not. Because NATO has kept the peace in Europe since the end of the Second World War.
Look, I'd love to carry this on for another half an hour, 3 days, 2.5 days, a month, whatever you want really. But there's an election around the corner, and we're out of time. You were very lively, weren't you? But at least there's no blood on the walls. Will you say thank you and a nice round of applause for all our panel, please? Thank you very much. Thank you.